First of all, the topic today, we're going to be talking about core education. We're going to be working with the concept of core education at the University of Oregon. And just a quick introduction, I know many of you, but not all of you. So I'm Lisa Frankel, Vice Provost and Dean for Undergraduate Studies. Ron Brownhall, Associate Vice Provost for Academic Excellence. We've been working on this project along with about 10 other people, a project that we've been calling, because I love my acronyms, so please forgive me, but we've been calling it TREAD, Transforming Education by Design. And the work that we're going to be doing with you today is going to be sharing some of the insights and discoveries that we've made in the course of our investigation, beginning with this very core question of what our curriculum here provides. So some of you may recognize this statement. Some of you who've been here a while may have been part of the undergraduate council or Senate conversations that produced this statement. The general education curriculum prizes a common educational experience for all students. Well, when you look at this trailing image of gen ed courses and numbers of students, right, you have to ask whether the 1,100 plus courses that are currently on the books satisfying either gen ed or multicultural requirements, whether those really constitute something like a core educational experience. Is there a core at the University of Oregon? So we've been investigating that question.
Thanks for the segue.
That was awesome.
We started with this idea that we didn't want to do general education reform. That's not the idea we started with. The idea we started with was, first of all, is there a core, and should there be, and what's really going on in our curriculum, particularly around kind of that first 2 years, our core education, as we call gen ed, but we have a basic distribution requirement. So we started looking at what other places have done. We started looking at the research, the literature. This is a quote from a prominent institution that underwent, that suffered through gen ed reform. Any guesses about where this quote's from? Anyone? Good one. Yeah, you read the piece, right? So this was Sean Kelly, professor of philosophy at Harvard, and so they went through this process. It was grueling. It was well chronicled. At the end, despite nearly 4 years of deliberation, a working group, a committee, and a task force, the very problems that the designers of the gen ed program intended to allay are the ones plaguing it today. So we realized this is true everywhere that we looked, right? Penn State, lots of places have been through this. They did an autopsy of gen ed. You can see on the left, 2004, the core, on the right, gen ed 2015. What you see in the boxes is, comments that are very similar. So we could spend a lot of energy really thinking through, in rooms together, haggling over what we should require and what it should look like and what the structure should be, and spend 5 to 10 years doing that and end up in a place that it's not clear would have any real benefit for our students. And we just didn't want to do that. So we just decided we're going to approach this in a really, really different kind of way, right? We're just going to first start by asking students and then asking faculty about their experience in the undergraduate education here at U of O. And we did that in some kind of creative ways that you'll learn about later. We also looked at the research, and we brought a couple of researchers to campus. You may have seen them at the Senate from Wabash, interestingly enough, but they have this center of inquiry. They've done this longitudinal study on the factors that go into creating a good liberal arts education. And you can look up their study and read through the study design. I won't go through that. But they really wanted to learn, what are the teaching practices, what are the programs, what are the institutional structures that support liberal arts education, and what are the methods of assessing that? So that was their question. They've worked with lots of institutions and made some interesting observations about what they see. They generally say that most institutions have some form of a distribution system, despite maybe changing the names or calling it something fancy, thematic clusters or whatever. It ends up being basically a distribution system. Take some of that, some of that, some of that. And we hope you put it together into something meaningful in your mind, right? So lofty expectations, hoping that magically somehow the structure will produce the outcomes we're looking for. And they've not seen much evidence of that happening. This is what, based on their research that they've concluded, actually creates meaningful outcomes for students. And on the surface of it, it doesn't seem all that surprising, right? Of course, good teaching, that makes a lot of sense. Challenging our students and expecting a lot from them, that makes a lot of sense. Interactional diversity maybe isn't so obvious, but if you dig into it a little bit, you think, well, that makes sense too, right? Having meaningful interactions with people who don't think like me, who don't come from the place that I come from, might enhance your education. So these are kind of the three core things that they've discovered, and they looked at measures of all of these different affective and cognitive outcomes and looked at how those three things affected them. And it's like across the board, those are the three things that kept popping up. So there's nothing in this about the structure of gen ed, like what courses should you take. And I think what we've seen in sort of our research around gen ed reform is you get the grand compromise because we all have a stake in, right? We all have our own kind of disciplinary stake in what gets required. So that creates this kind of compromise where it's just a little bit of everything. And then we've kind of skipped over the whole wave of learning outcomes focused gen ed reform, which is what's been happening over the last 15 to 20 years. So most places started with a discipline-based gen ed program, and then because of probably accreditation and outside external influences started with instituted a learning outcomes-based gen ed, so combined with a distribution model. So, every student will take so many writing courses or courses that include critical thinking or whatever. We just skipped that step altogether. We didn't even try that one. So we're still in the content base, but no one's really looking at where it seems to be the potential for the most gain, which is the actual learning experience. Turns out what happens in the classroom matters a great deal, and we haven't really talked about how we go about creating structures to change that.
So to think about what we might do that would actually provide the kind of transformative change. I mean, nobody really wants, I don't think, to be on a task force or committee for 4 or 5, or at Harvard, actually, the process took about 11 years all told to end up with something that is not an improvement. So how do you make lasting change? Well, one way is you start with a design challenge. What are we trying to do? And our design challenge, which actually comes, this language is closely allied to the language of the strategic framework process that happened now 4 years ago. How might we design a transformational, cohesive 4-year undergraduate educational experience that reflects our identity as a premier public research institution with a strong liberal arts core? And then, borrowing the language from the Night Gift, which is very inspirational, aspirational language, how might we engage around the emerging theme of accelerating impact as a potential brand? And I know a lot of us are allergic to words like brand, but we're using it here advisedly, without scare quotes even, as a potential brand for undergraduate education. And as Ron has been pointing out, this design challenge can't just be met by rearranging structures. If that worked, there would be brilliant gen ed reform processes all over the country, and the research does not bear that out. So instead, thinking about change from an example of the 19th century, okay, thinking about the sailing ship, the clipper ship, and thinking about the kind of incremental change. Now, this is an example that I'm borrowing from sort of the world of kind of business motivation, but to me, it's a very helpful way of visualizing this. So if your design problem is our ships don't go fast enough, and your paradigm is, well, sails and masts are what make ships go fast, then what you might end up with incremental change over years is with this ship, which was and I'm trying to remember the name of this ship, and I don't have my notes here in front of me, but if you're interested, you can Google the most ridiculous clipper ship ever made. 1907, this ship, 7 masts, right? It foundered, everyone on the ship except for the captain died, right? Because it turns out 7 masts is kind of unwieldy. And along the way, while this kind of incremental change was happening, well, there was this other thing that was happening that also involved air. It was called the steam ship, and it turned out to be actually a real transformative change. So how do we move away from the kind of incremental tweaks and sort of nibbling away at issues in order to get something transformative? And the answer, I think, is that we don't start simply with a problem orientation, with a sense of this is broken. That locks us into a system. So if we think, oh, how do we get rid of all these damn mice? Well, then we're stuck with the problem of creating a better mousetrap. This is the clipper ship model. Instead, what needs to begin to inspire us is actually our aspirations about what do we want. That's sort of driving toward a solution that's anchored in what we're actually experiencing. I'm sorry, this mic is acting up. What we're actually experiencing and where our aspirational energies are. So what do we actually want? What are we actually experiencing? That is a question that can only be answered if we dive into who we actually are, which is what we did. So we began with this very simple prompt, right? And this exercise which we called Dear X. So a prompt went to faculty, it went to students, it also went to some staff, and the question was, to help us understand your experience at the U of O, please write a 5 to 6 sentence letter, and most of the letters were a little bit longer than that, to professor, if you were a student, or to student X, communicating to them what you wish you could. Professor or student X can be a particular prof or student, a combination of prof students, or the prof-student body at large. Your letter can be positive, negative, both, or include whatever else you would like to include. Now, I'm not going to vouch for the beauty or grammatical correctness of that prompt, but I will say that it produced hundreds of fascinating, moving, interesting, infuriating, energizing letters, which we sifted through, pulling out quotes, crafting the 15-minute-ish performance that you're about to see. So these are our TREAD players, 3 faculty, 3 students, their names here, directed by Abigail, where are you? Our wonderful Abigail Leader. And this performance, which will be, it's a staged reading, so this is not, this is not Hamlet at Oregon Shakespeare Festival, okay? But, it'll be what it will be. So we'll hear the performance. I don't want to prejudge your experience. We'll hear the performance, and then we're going to dive into some different kinds of debriefing exercises. So without further ado, put up the slide screen.
Dear student, welcome to the UO. Time flies and your time here is short. Make the most of it.
Dear professor, thank you for opening my eyes to new ideas and new cultures. I've learned more in 1 year here than my whole high school career.
Dear professor, I like when you use analogies. I like when you explain applications.
I like when you remember our names.
I like when you offer learning opportunities outside of the classroom. I like when you arrive early, enthusiastic, and prepared.
I like that you care about us as students and want to devote time to teaching us.
I like that your priorities are with us as students first, not research.
Dear student, this is an amazing time of your life. You have a wide range of opportunities to challenge yourself, think deeply, and expand your horizons, grow as a person.
You are in charge of your learning. Please embrace these opportunities.
Take initiative, ask questions, seek mentoring, read and think broadly, and yes, go to football games, get involved in campus clubs, and volunteer to make a difference.
Define your own objectives and invite me to be a part of your journey.
But this is your journey. Embrace it.
Dear professor, when I enter your class, take my seat, and sigh inwardly, I know you can sense something's amiss. You ask if I'm okay, and I nod and smile and say, I'm fine. What you don't know is that I'm under stress that I've never experienced before. I can't afford to sit in your class. My parents are not supporting me, and the bulk of my tuition payment is through a loan they refuse to co-sign. I've been to the financial aid office more than your office hours. I have cried and been told I don't have any options. Take a year off, claim independency. I'm 913 miles away from home and I can't go back. I just turned 18 a month ago. I don't have credit and no one can help me. I thought I was invincible. I thought I was gonna be someone. I am here in college being told to go back to fast food. And then maybe I can come back once I pay $15,000 for my first term. What am I supposed to do? While you lecture, I am stuck stressing about how I can break my housing contract without paying out thousands of dollars. I think, how am I gonna pay for rent if I get an apartment? And how can I get back to this university? Professor, I love your class, but I can't afford it.
Textbooks are really fucking expensive.
Way too overpriced for quality.
Oh, less money spent on sports and dumb shit.
I wish you could know how much the faculty are here to support your success. We want to be on your side. We want you to succeed. However, we need you to be responsible for your own academic well-being.
Recognize how wonderful it is to be a student. Recognize how wonderful it is to learn about the world. You know, education is not just about getting a job. It's a part of the joy of being human, like falling in love or taking a walk in the woods.
Dear Professor, I want to be happy about my college experience. And for the most part, I am. And then I have to remember the price that I had to pay to be here. See, I went to war twice, and still it's becoming less and less accessible for people like me to be here. And perhaps this is where you come in. Please use your power and your privilege to make a difference.
Dear student, I'm sorry. Sorry that academia has failed you. Failed to recognize your collective wisdom and inherent passion for making the world, our world, a better place. So I'm saying sorry, and I implore you to have and push the academy to change its ways.
Dear Professor, as a student, I need you to know that this is a Gen Ed class, and I'm a first-generation college student who needs guidance and support. I'm planning on becoming a middle school social studies teacher, but that requires some Group 3 classes. I understand you may not be familiar teaching a 101 class, but you should listen to your students' feedback. I also have to work 2 part-time jobs to pay rent to be able to attend this university. If I'm spending my time in your class, I need to learn something from it with a supportive guidance, not a college is hard mentality.
Dear student, please follow instructions and meet the deadline.
If you do not follow instructions and meet the deadline, a graduate program will not even look at your application.
If you're not following instructions or meet the deadline, an employer could fire you. Therefore, there is a reason to read all the instructions and deadline details during your undergraduate career.
A side note for you. Being early is actually considered being on time. And being on time is actually considered being late. Show courtesy and respect for others' time.
Dear Professor, I'm writing to inform you that I decided to no longer attend your class. I will still be enrolled in the course and will show up for the midterm and exam, but otherwise I will be absent for the remainder of the term. The reason for this is I find your teaching style and just overall skill as a professor boring, pathetic, and unprofessional, and as kids say these days, weak as hell. I wish you luck in your futile attempt to cram your mundane content into the skulls of those Neanderthals you call students. And I hope you have a wonderful day.
Dear Professor, laughing at us and telling us that we should know this as we're trying to concentrate on taking the quiz does not somehow jog our memories. Announcing that there will be a quiz might help.
When you write AX plus PX on the board, don't expect us to somehow know that's your abbreviation for animals and people.
Dear student, I've never met you, and I don't know what it's like to be a student at this university or even in this day and time.
Dear Professor, I wish you could remember what it was like to be a college student.
I wish you wouldn't belittle your students with your elitist language.
I wish you would make education more accessible and approachable for students.
Dear student, please, please, please come to office hours.
Dear Professor, please remember to take a break from the academic culture and look back on how intimidating it was to sit in the back of the classroom and not stand in the front of it.
Dear student, it breaks my heart that you've never felt the deep, transformative joy and maybe sadness of immersion in long, sustained thought. That you've never read a novel except for Harry Potter or the Hunger Games, and that your eyes glaze over after 5 minutes of lecture. It breaks my heart that your work sputters and fits and starts with too much information and too little time.
I wish you understood how much work I have to do to get a good grade.
Your grade doesn't matter that much. Don't focus on the right answer. Just think about how it is you got to your answer. That's what matters.
Dear Professor, I wish you understood how much work I have for all my classes combined. 100 pages a night of reading, plus presentations, plus essays. I feel like I'm drowning.
I wish you knew that I'm smarter than my exams or paper make me sound.
I wish you knew how passionate I am about your class, but I have to prioritize and do work for other classes that have potential to hurt my grade.
I do everything I can for the grade. Sleepless nights, no food, no family or friend time. I have to get that grade.
Dear student, I don't care about your grade.
I will not treat you differently if you fail an exam or a quiz. I care about your education. I want you to learn.
If you care about your grade and you want a good one, demonstrate to me that you have learned and grown over the course of the term.
Dear Professor, get your shit together. Do not change the parameters of the assignment the day it is due.
And do not post the assignment the day that is due, so we don't have any time to work on it.
And don't make the assignment due at 10 p.m. on Saturday or 9 a.m. on Sunday. That's just stupid, and you should know better.
Dear student, please don't email me at 1 in the morning wanting to reschedule your midterm for 8:30 that morning. That's too late.
And then do not end the email asking me to respond to you as soon as possible. Again, it's too late. You only gave me 7 hours to respond, and most of those a reasonable person would be asleep.
Dear Professor, I work 35 hours a week, and I'm taking 17 credits.
At this point in your life, you have the opportunity to learn about anything.
I'm sorry, but reading a book for your class just isn't my first priority.
Note that after you graduate, you will never have as much time or freedom to pursue your passions as you do now.
But I'm paying for the university to teach me in class, not out of some dull book or online news article.
You don't have a passion yet? Try everything.
I will learn better by applying the knowledge to a graded assignment instead of taking quizzes every week on reading that I just didn't have time to do.
Learn how to fail. Yeah, over and over again. Fail and get good at failing because recovering from failure is a necessary component of success.
Sorry.
Dear Professor, bloody hell, get your teaching together. Barely any of us in your class can follow your lecture, and any attempt to change, you have been met with pompous responses that fix absolutely nothing.
Being a nice person doesn't make up for you being a terrible teacher. Honestly, it just makes us feel guilty for hating you.
I'm not paying for you to continually cancel class and not grade my work. Stop pretending you're a hippie and get your life together.
Do you just not care? How can I help you to care? Do you need inspiration or leadership by example, bribery, what?
If you're struggling, ask for help. If you don't know where or how to get help with academics or life, ask. And when we make suggestions, you are an adult, so we expect you to follow through. Go to office hours, attend help sessions, visit an academic advisor, talk to a counselor, go exercise, put down your phone. Explore new subjects and ways to think about the world, and take advantage of every resource available on campus. These are here for you.
Professor, you cannot know the effects that your words and actions have on my perception of learning and motivation to pursue education.
Dear Professor, when you told me that you enjoyed reading my writing, you cannot understand how much that meant to me.
Enthusiasm and investment make both of our jobs easier.
When you encouraged learning as opposed to testing, it gave me hope.
Professor, please continue to treat your students with equal respect. Encourage us all equally.
Dear Professor, I love when you say more than what's on your slides.
I hate when you read directly off your slides, staring at the slides and speaking in a monotone voice.
Dear Professor, you're smart, funny, kind, and passionate about your work. Your students should respect you more than they currently do.
However, the organization of your class is 10 times harder than the actual concepts.
Sometimes I get very lost in a big class, sitting around a lot of people, listening to professors use a lot of vocabulary I just don't understand. As a minority group on campus, most of the international students have probably had a similar experience to my own. We might seem a little bit dumb to keep silent in a classroom because living in another country and speaking a completely different language is not easy.
Dear student, I'm amazed at all that you juggle. You have so many trains coming at you at once, and yet you're still standing. Good job. Be encouraged, and as you go through this, you will define what is important to you, and you will realize your importance on this earth.
Dear Professor, don't take it personally that I'm always late. It's not about disrespect. I pay to be here, so stop taking it personally. If my ass is in the seat, then it shows that I care and I want to learn. You don't need to assign a fuck ton of homework to prove that we need to care about this class seriously. Trust me, we get it. Oh, and also, I don't give a single fuck about the word count.
Dear student, what I teach you is truly a benefit for you to learn. If we spend class time on a discussion or a topic, then it is truly worth your time.
I understand that you have a very busy schedule, and you want to obtain the best possible grade in every class for the lowest amount of time and effort possible.
Dear student, I want you to love your classes as much as you love your ducks.
Dear Professor, I was terrified to go to your office hours, and when I did, I felt as though your explanation and clarification were absolutely no help, and that's what I was confused about. You were slightly condescending, and I felt bad that I didn't understand the material. I hope that in the future, you choose to help students who are struggling and not belittle them.
Listen to marginalized students needs more.
I often feel invisible. It sucks.
Too often, I feel lost in the mix of students that you view as mediocre.
You see only the best of the best as worthy of your attention. People need to be valued in order to care. If you don't care, why should I?
Dear Professor, your commitment to multicultural competency is laughable. You're protected by your tenure, which stinks. Everyone has given you terrible evaluations, and yet, here you still are.
I wish that using inclusive language was a top priority for you.
I wish you would actually work with students with varying disabilities instead of making accommodations only if a student has filed a disability with the AEC.
Dear Professor, I'm thankful for the times that you stepped outside your profession and acknowledged me as a person. Anytime you took a moment to see our shared humanity was bliss. Whenever you chose to engage with me, it felt more comfortable all around.
Dear Professor, I'm sorry that the university doesn't value you as much as those doing research, who are crappy teachers.
Thank you for practicing what you preach. Thank you for your respect and sensitivity when teaching us about traumatic things. I was really blessed by your knowledge and compassion when I had traumas of my own.
Dear Professor, do not email me saying that your wife is out of town. Don't ask me to come work out with you. It made me very uncomfortable.
You are typically a white male, and me, a woman of color. I wish you understood the complexities. This isn't easy for me, and you don't understand me, and you don't even try to understand me. Can you just please try?
Dear student, the time I spend with you in the classroom is the best time of my week. I really hope you're enjoying yourself too, that you feel like it's time well spent, and that you're really learning something that enriches your life.
Dear Professor, I wish that as a woman, I would feel more safe on campus, that as a Latina, I would be more included, supported, and just surrounded by people of color.
Dear student, I wish we had a better model for education, one where we can harness your energy and enthusiasm and make an impact on the world.
I wish you would have cared about me as an individual.
I wish you would understand that your education is your responsibility.
I wish that all professors had to take a technology class, because it amazes me that some of them don't even know how to do full screen on YouTube.
I wish you were as excited about your learning as you are about socializing.
I wish you were more approachable.
I wish I had more of a chance to speak with you outside of class.
I wish I could sit and listen to you talk for endless hours because I respect you and I want to hear about everything you've accomplished.
I wish you were truly the focus of our collective priorities.
Dear Professor, I wish you understood us. Dear student,
I wish I understood you.
All right, group. We wanted to do a quick debrief, but I'm wondering how the microphone's going to work for us, so we'll see. Oh, that performance was wonderful. Thank y'all. Is anybody willing to share something that struck you or something that came out in your rapid sharing?
It became kind of apparent that while professors wanted us as students to be really enthusiastic, that there's a lot holding us back from having that enthusiastic learning experience. That's kind of what we came here for.
What strikes me is that sad monologue at the beginning, which reminds us that there's so much that's hidden that we don't see, that we don't observe, that's difficult to observe. In some cases, we don't have the opportunities. In some cases, it's because they don't want to share that necessarily with us, their challenges and obstacles. And that's a challenge to help support them in things that we don't know what we're supporting them in. But it's important that we have like those sorts of moments of clarity to help us have empathy and maybe flexibility. One thing that struck me in a way that maybe not as succinctly ever before as just now is that one way of putting it is that empathy is hard to scale. And that's something a challenge that I deal with in my courses.
Anna, did I see your hand?
Yeah. Something that struck me was just sort of a misalignment of whose responsibility is it for undergraduate education or education in general. It seemed like on the professorate side, it was very, you need to take this into your own hands and be on time and meet deadlines, and I'm here for you, but you really need to take advantage of all these things. There's lots of resources, and it's very much up to you to do those things. And on the flip side, and this is probably related to sort of the commodification of education, of I'm paying for this, and I have certain expectations that you will be providing me with this particular education that meets my needs, and I'm giving the feedback on you, and so you need to sort of be able to listen to that. And so that kind of struck me. It seems like there's a misalignment of expectations of what this experience is supposed to be and who's responsible for it.
Well put. Marianne.
It seemed to me that a theme, at least that I identified, was that the comments from students seemed to be more transactional in nature, in terms of all the things that they need to do in order to get their degree and all the hoops they need to jump. And the ones from professors were more aspirational in terms of what they wanted holistically for students to gain out of the experience. But the conversation seemed to be happening at such different levels and in such different dimensions that the connection was just not happening. I wonder whether we're setting too much of a transactional system for our students.
I thought that these comments that have been made really point to the structural elegance of this presentation, of how it was put together. That you had these adjacencies and these juxtapositions of students and faculty engaged in this dialogue, and we could see from this that everybody was right. Everybody was speaking, very earnestly and respectfully from their own point of view, and we're saying yes, 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 so that we saw that it was all and we saw the respect that the students had, they had compassion, and the faculty has compassion, and I sense that everybody was open and really asking for and crying for a way to bridge these simultaneously coexisting realities.
As a grad student, I was struck by how these perspectives seem to run into them on a daily basis, and it made me think that I feel personally worried for myself that will I arrive at a point when I become a future professor where I cease to hear the perspectives on a daily basis in the way that I hear now. And I'm wondering, is there something structurally which just prevents these I don't know if a student would say what they wrote, some of those comments to a professor in their face, and it makes me think that you could go your whole career without never hearing somebody say something like that.
Everybody in the group, take a moment to choose the quote from the presentation that resonates.
Small envelope.
The small envelope. So you're going to spread the quotes from the envelope on the table, and everyone's going to pick a quote that resonates for you and share with each other why it resonates. So don't overthink it too much. Choose the quote that jumps out at you, and then share with each other why that quote. Okay, so I know you're still talking. Let me throw in another element to this. Okay, another envelope. So the large envelope at the table has a bunch of photographs. And here the opportunity, again, sort of not thinking it too much, but to choose a photograph that also sort of strikes you as a way to kind of ease your way into thinking how that photograph depicts an attribute that you think UO education needs.
Despite the fact that, and I think that our education system...
So the instruction with the pictures, yeah, our whole goal here was to completely confuse you. No. To give us a kind of analogic lateral way to start to think our way past clipper ship logic into some other kind of way to approach a more solution-focused angle. So using the photographs, grabbing what resonates with you as a way to talk about an attribute that you would like to see in a UO core education, right? An attribute that you would, so I want the education to ignite my students with the brilliance of 1,000 suns, whatever it is. It can be goofy, it can be deep, it can be complex, it can be simple, okay? Does that make sense?
I went ahead and took notes and captured what everyone at our table said. Embrace the elephant in the room. Accept students as who they are, as beautiful. Have an adaptable education that caters to the students' needs. Help students break barriers and allow them and their communities to rise. Suspend judgment and realize there is value in all beings who are here. Good education is a process that takes time. There was an image of an elephant and a little kid snuggling up to it. Accept students as who they are, as beautiful.
I think it's rare when students really take the time to advocate for their wants and needs in like an academic setting, and like for that to be really heard. I think it's just really important, whether it's like in advising of like, I want to take these different classes, can you accommodate my needs? Or whether it's, hey, I'm like juggling all of this in this one specific class, can you accommodate my needs?
So something about empowering students as self-advocates or themselves as change agents?
I mean, it's pretty ballsy to go up to your professor and be
Yeah.
like, hey, like, I can't meet these parameters, is there something you can do for me? And then for just to get like a clean no, as opposed to like, well, let's be creative, let's problem solve together. Like, isn't that what we're supposed to be doing? So, yeah, ballsy, put that on there. It's over there.
One of our ideas was to find a way to structure the gen ed curriculum so that the students can organize their learning around some topic or issue that they care about across classes.
So more topical, self-directed.
Well, for example, incoming students could pick a issue or topic that they really care about and then take a variety of who knows what classes as required, and then join in teams afterward or at the same time based upon a shared interest in a topic and do a team solution that problem so that they're working together and having an experience that's knit together and is relevant to them.
One thing we talked about is that whatever the core was, that everyone on campus would know what it was and why it was, so that you could stop any student and they would understand what the core Gen Ed was about, why they were doing it. And any faculty would know that, any staff and advising, like all the pieces that really make up our campus, we would all understand what it was and why we were doing it and why it had value.
We talked a lot at our table about the idea of making things more visible, and so one of the things that we could make more visible is the good work that students are doing in the core curriculum, and celebrate not just the achievements of students who are entering into the expert phase of studenthood, but really showing that we value and find the work that students are doing in their early core classes as valuable.
Just again, throwing the grad student perspective, if the core is going to rely heavily on graduate teachers, which I think is lovely, and I think there have been great resources for training grad students here. I think it's wonderful. I'm just wondering whether or not that should just be a thing that all graduate students who teach in any capacity should just be paid to do. Like, it seems like you can be a graduate teacher and not have to take any courses on teaching, and then you're suddenly responsible for, and that just seems like a really bad bet. So I feel like the people who go do these things are fine teachers. Some of them are fine regardless, but I have had some awful graduate teachers in my career as a student. Yeah. And it's not their fault. They need to learn how to do it.
I've been around so long that I remember the last time we did this, 1990. I used to teach at Washington State University in the architecture school, and our Gen Ed requirement within that school consisted entirely of interdisciplinary courses that were taught around a topic or theme, but 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 faculty would teach the course and give the students the different ways of critical thinking and the different takes on the same topic. And that work, it had a logistical nightmare for the faculty, but it was still effective.
Whatever the core education is, whatever it becomes, it needs to be accessible to the poor. It's been said that if it's not accessible to the poor, then it's neither radical nor revolutionary. And so if the communities that I come from can't even be in the classroom, then frankly I don't care, what great ideas you come up with, because I won't be experiencing them.
And can I just say, and this to me is an elephant in the room that no one's mentioned, so I was saying to Ron, do I get to mention something that has struck me in the course of this work? And it's just how angry folks are. So the students say that, like, get your shit together. The professors say that in different ways. Sometimes get your shit together. Meet the deadlines. Or please, 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 please come to office hours. So that seems like an emotional piece that no structure will fix. I mean, comes back to Melina's point about the infrastructural realities, like, and the point about accessibility, like, okay, so if that can't be fixed without like huge amounts of money that we don't seem to have, then what? So one thing is, and this is just my own, you got to hunker down in that reality somehow, and that probably takes the form of a lot of conversations and a lot of I love empathy. Does empathy scale? Does empathy scale? If empathy doesn't scale, we are screwed, because there's a lot of high emotions. And just in that note so one of those high emotions is expressed in a handout that's over there that we're just leaving over there, but it's not our handout, but it's, because I was also struck with, Melina, your point was about the student, the ways in which idealism is problematic on the side of the student, but it's also problematic on the side of faculty, staff, that we're all facing the same kinds of real world pressures, right? Okay, so end of that.
I'm moving on, yeah. I was just curious if anyone thinks, I'm asking this seriously, if anyone in the room thinks it's fine. Like, our Gen Ed's fine, let's just leave it. It's okay. Okay, it's okay, right?
Well, I think by looking at, you put up the table of all the diversity, but to assume that there's a lot of different courses and there's no unity is, I think, a specious assumption. There can be still unity of theme and unity of purpose in diversity, and we value diversity. But I think looking at it in terms of courses is like looking for more sales. Most of the learning happens outside of the classroom. And the most valuable resources students have when they come on this campus is not faculty, it is each other. And when we wake up to that, we can transform this.
Any other response to that? So when we were pouring through all the letters and kind of thinking about, what does this mean? How do we derive meaning from this? We began to recognize what you've already really pointed out today, and what was, I think, sort of structured in the performance were these sort of gaps, right? So there's clear expectations gaps. What students expect from faculty, what faculty expect from students, what students expect from their education, what faculty expect education to do, right? There's these kinds of ways that we're talking past each other. There's a value gap for many students. I mean, when we continue to raise the price on the thing that we're offering and we don't pay attention to what that thing is, then we get a value gap. And I'm not saying it's not good or it is good, but there's a perception, at least expressed in these letters, that I'm paying a lot for this. What is it? What am I getting? Where's the value, right? There's a belonging gap that we notice as well, that many students not sort of feeling like, how do they fit in? How do they sort of find their way here? And what is faculty's role in that? And so those were sort of three of the big ones. And, to the point over here about the idealism, so what does this all mean? What do we do with this? I mean, in this kind of process that we're using, the idea is to unearth kind of the insights. What is going on here? What is happening? There are certainly constraints. There are structural constraints. There are all kinds of constraints. But if we don't try to pay attention to what's actually going on and then start thinking about ways to address that, then we risk doing what Harvard and so many others did, which is in some ways the easier exercise of looking at the components without the people involved and kind of rearranging those. I mean, in 5 to 10 years, a long time. We'd have a lot of fights about that on the Senate floor, but we could at least sort of conceptually conceive of how that might be done. It's harder to conceive of how we address what we heard today. But we think there are some avenues, and we're beginning to explore those. They're not easy, they take time, they involve faculty, but we wanted to kind of preview for you some things that we've put into place already to begin addressing what is happening in the classroom, because that seems to be a place that we can make a difference. So we launched this year the Teaching Academy. And just kind of a soft launch, inviting some faculty who had been recognized on this campus in various ways as good teachers and award recipients and participants in teaching engagement programs. So this is the Teaching Academy is hosted, sponsored, led by the Teaching Engagement Program. We brought those faculty together. The first event we had in the fall was 80 faculty, much like, about this size, to talk about good teaching. What does that mean? To give tools to try and spread those practices. So that's one thing we did. The other thing that we're doing, that we're going to launch here soon, is this, and again, forgive the acronyms, we've been playing around with the names, but Communities for Accelerating Impact of Teaching. And these are faculty learning communities or faculty communities of practice. So this is a practice that's been successfully implemented at other places. It's a practice recommended by the Wabash researchers as a way of engaging faculty around particular topics, right, over the course of, say, a year, where they're actually working on the ground on their own courses. They're working with evidence-based teaching practices. They're learning from each other. They're informing each other. And through that, we get not only redesigned courses and the spread of good teaching practices, but we would ask those groups to also help inform, particular curricular policy changes or curricular reform. We think the way that core education will be revitalized, and we prefer to talk about it that way than to talk about reform. This is not, clearly a repeal and replace approach isn't going to work here. It's an evolution, really. So how do we begin to evolve our curriculum?
And Ron, I
Yes.
just want to throw in, and the faculty learning communities, there are things that we've done on this campus already. So if you think about the science literacy program, the working group of active teaching and learning, these are these cohorts that have created not just individual transformations for individual syllabi, but actual cohorts that raise the discourse level in whole areas of approach, curricular approach, departmental culture.
And another example is the working group on active teaching and learning, sponsored by the Teaching Engagement Program. We're now into our third? Three full cohorts of how many? 16 faculty go through that. So, yep, TEP, UO Libraries, Yamada language. So we have some examples of this on campus, good examples on other campuses. So then the question is, how do we connect this to actual policy change? And to do that, we've got to make sure we're connected to the Senate structures. And I think partly, and I was on the undergrad council for 8 years and chaired it, and now I'm a member as an administrator. And this topic always comes up on the undergrad council, for instance. And it's frankly a council that doesn't have the bandwidth to do this kind of work, because they are busy working on approving programs and program changes, and and the curriculum committee that approves all the courses, they don't have the bandwidth to do this kind of work. So one recommendation is for a core education committee to be formed. Bill and I are in conversations about what that might look like. That would be, their job would be to focus on the core undergraduate education piece. And so to link these faculty communities with the Senate Core Education Committee. The Senate Core Education Committee could also be entertaining other thoughts, right? Other ideas about structural changes. This isn't to say that we don't need structural change. It's just to say that that in and of itself will be insufficient to produce better outcomes for our students. But it could be part of what needs to happen. So connecting those two and making sure that there's a strong connection between those two to inform not only course revitalization, but curriculum revitalization. So this is kind of the model we're thinking about moving forward, and we'll begin to engage around particular topics. So for instance, we have a group right now working on the multicultural requirement that was at the request of President Schill. And in a way, that's a faculty working group, faculty learning community that's following this model. That group will be making some recommendations to the undergrad council. So that's an example of how this could work. We will be looking at one focused on a particular issue around student success, which is courses with high non-complete rates. This is a nationwide problem in key gateway courses. They tend to be science and math, but not always. And there are things we can do to help more students succeed in those courses and not run into that roadblock. So having a faculty group look at that particular problem cross disciplines is another effort. And then another effort we're hoping to partner with CAS on is looking at how we might use online education, which we've not done a good job of on this campus in terms of being strategic about how to employ online learning technologies to address particular issues like course capacity issues and so on. So ultimately, the faculty own these kinds of approaches, which is, the question about, I wish it was more flexible, why do we have this one requirement that the student has to pass to get out of here? The ironic thing is we have those because the faculty passed those. Now, sometimes we can't always find, the historical record of when was that passed and why, and so we're working through some of that. But this is sort of the model moving forward. The way to get engaged will be putting out some calls for faculty to participate in various ways. We'd love to hear more ideas about ways that we might continue this conversation. It's really important that you're here today. We really value your participation. We learned a lot more, I think, from your comments and your imagining what this might be.
One piece about these CATES, these communities for accelerating impact on teaching, too, is that unlike typical faculty learning communities, the goal is to have student interns in these groups as well. But the fundamental principle here is that real change comes actually from delving into what a specific community is experiencing, desiring, aspiring toward. It's from the place where the ideals emerge in relationship to the constraints, right? That's where you don't just have clipper ship stuff. That's where you start to think not just how do we build a better mousetrap, but you think like, well, what's the problem with those little rodents? They're kind of cute, or maybe they're not cute, or maybe I love cats and I need more, wherever it goes. But you actually hunker down in the lived experience that makes this community. And then what you're evolving is a core curriculum that actually is U of O's core curriculum, because it's born from this community. It's not born from some model that we're trying to mandate down from the top. So keep eyes open. We're still evolving exactly how we structure staff, compensate work for being involved in these communities. It needs to be compensated. It needs to be serious work. But you will hear more in the next few weeks, and hopefully some of you will be deeply involved in that process or help us think through the next steps through your interest and energy.